David Fincher's feature directorial debut was a baptism by fire, with studio interference hindering his involvement with the production every stop of the way. The production problems of Alien 3 were highly publicized, and the final film, released in May of 1992, was met with heavy criticism. Those willing to give it a closer look, however, recognized fairly quickly that the version of Alien 3, released into the world at the time, may not have been the fully intended story. Footage from trailers, production images, details from the novelization, and comic adaptation all suggested a significant amount was cut from the movie. While it's not exactly unusual to see bits of scenes that would end up removed from a film in a trailer, in this case it seemed like much more than what one could usually expect. Soon the concept of an Alien 3 director's cut, the true version of the film, became the thing of legend. In the dawning of the internet age, versions of an Alien 3 workprint began to circulate, confirming that there was much more to this movie than what initially met the eye. Could there be a better version of Alien 3 out there somewhere? Could there exist a possibility that a fully realized cut, much closer aligned with David Fincher's vision, is available in some form and just waiting to be revisited? In true Alien 3 fashion, the answer to that wasn't exactly as straightforward as we could have hoped. Enter the coinciding DVD age. It was a home video market explosion. Director's cuts certainly weren't unheard of by this time, but the format took every advantage to create incentive for audiences to revisit classic and contemporary films with new versions now available on DVD. The labels varied. There were director's cuts, extended cuts, unrated cuts, special editions, and in the case of Alien 3, assembly cuts. In December of 2003, Alien 3 fans were treated to a Christmas present in the form of the Alien Quadrilogy DVD set, which included alternate versions of all 4 films, and finally gave us all a chance to see what was missing from David Fincher's flawed entry. The booklet included with the set did come with a warning, though. There is no wondrous, lost director's cut of Alien 3. It doesn't exist. Indeed, for such a dream to be realized, Fincher would have to be allowed to remake the film from scratch with complete creative control. What does exist is something perhaps equally fascinating. For the first time, fans can now experience a fully restored and remastered presentation of the 1991 assembly cut of Alien 3. With the running time increased by 30 minutes, this special edition contains several never-before-seen sequences that offer fascinating insights into the film's difficult editing process. This cut also reveals a combination of vintage, previously unreleased optical effects shots and several newly completed digital effects necessary to integrate new footage into the body of the film. It was a fair enough warning to fans not to expect some kind of definitive cut retaining Fincher's vision, but it was enticing nevertheless. This assembly cut had a great presentation, though was admittedly a little rough around the edges, specifically due to some audio issues where only on-set audio, distorted very often by steam, wouldn't sound as good as the audio from the completed feature film. Fox Home Video Entertainment would outdo themselves a few years later for the Blu-ray release, having brought in the cast to re-record certain lines and seamlessly edit it together for the high-definition version released in 2011. Just goes to show how revered this assembly cut became since its release in 2003. People revisited the film, they re-evaluated it, they saw something in it they never quite saw before. There are fans out there who absolutely swear by this assembly cut and feel the theatrical version may as well no longer exist. To many, the assembly cut is the closest thing we have to a definitive version of Alien 3. But is it really better than the original version we got in 1992? And if so, why? That's something I wanted to explore with today's video, and I wanted to compare these two cuts of the film to see where their strengths and weaknesses lie. Previously on the channel, I have done comparisons between different cuts, taking a look at the director's cut of Alien and the special edition of Aliens, which were much more straightforward tasks. For the most part, you could point out a handful of removed scenes from each movie and get an idea of how they worked with or without them. They were never meant to serve as change-by-change comparisons, but more as an evaluation of the overall experience. In Alien 3's case, the assembly cut has significantly more footage added, and it's all intricately woven in and out throughout the entire runtime. There are very big moments cut from the movie, entire subplots, but then there's maybe an additional line here or there, a different shot here or there. It's truly a different beast. So I think the best way to approach this comparison is to take a look at it change by change. Maybe I won't bring up every single minute difference, but I do want to take a look at each of the differences as they appear in the film and offer my own thoughts on how they contribute to the experience. This is as much a comparison as it is an attempt to understand why certain cuts may have been made in the first place. Needless to say, this could end up being a long ride, so sit back, relax, and join me as I take a look at the assembly cut of Alien 3. The first few minutes of each version remain the same. The opening credits are presented between glimpses of things going terribly wrong on the Sulaco. The reveal of the alien egg, the facehugger, the acidic blood which causes a fire on board, and the ultimate ejection of the cryopods into the EEV. Once the escape vehicle makes its crash landing into the waters of Furina Fury 161, we begin to see footage that was not present in the theatrical cut. There are quite a few establishing shots of the planet, depicting the harsh and isolated world outside of the prison facility. This is also when we're introduced to the Clemens character, who discovers Ripley washed up on the beach, covered in mud and lice. Clemens carries Ripley and runs into the facility, calling for help to search for others as confused prisoners stand by, and he checks her vital signs. It's actually quite a bit of establishing moments that ultimately got left on the cutting room floor. Many fans were initially suspicious already of the amounts of cuts made to the film by this point, as this and even additional footage was featured prominently in the second trailer for the film to be released.
Here, in a world where the sun burns cold, and the wind blows colder, a visitor has come, but not by herself.
I like that we got these few moments to digest this new world that we're thrust into, and the visuals are absolutely beautiful. But maybe it is fair enough to exclude establishing the outside of the prison when not really any time is spent there. It's not like the first few shots of the original film, panning through the corridors of the Nostromo, laying out the location that would become more and more familiar as the film goes on. It's more about atmosphere, and even in the theatrical version, I think the film takes enough opportunities to let us catch wind of the overall tone. What is sacrificed, however, is keying us into the nature of Clemens. Already we can sense he's a loner, an outsider among these prisoners and staff. It also strengthens the bond he forms with Ripley, given that he's the one who first finds her and he's able to save her life. I think it's generally a stronger introduction to the character, and it aids in the audience having a closer affection for him, making it all the more shocking when he meets an untimely demise later on. I can certainly understand the cuts and the need to get things in motion just a little quicker, but I think it should have stayed in. The discovery of the poor souls in the EEV doesn't contain additional footage, rather it's completely alternate footage. What we see in the theatrical version is a result of reshoots, while the assembly cut uses the originally filmed scenes. In this version of the movie, of course, the host to the alien creature is not a dog, like in the theatrical, but an ox. We see that oxen are a part of this environment, and they're used to pull the wreckage out of the water. Needless to say, there's no appearance of Spike the dog as the prisoners investigate the EEV, or in the movie as a whole. Although the footage is completely different, you will be able to notice that some of the banter between the prisoners exists in both versions.
Get going, Frank! Hit him! Oh, Jesus Christ!
Hell of a way to make a landing!
Use the torch! Get going, Frank! Hit him! Oh, Jesus Christ!
Hell of a way to make a landing!
Use the torch!
How many?
Don't know! 3, maybe 4!
How many?
Don't know! 3, maybe 4! Hey, Frank, can we hurry this up? It's gonna be 40 below in 5 minutes! Hey, Frank, can we hurry this up? It's gonna be 40 below in 5 minutes!
The sequence also consists of Ripley being tended to, which does appear in the theatrical version, and shots of Superintendent Andrews filing his report to the company. We see the text on the computer screen and his distorted reflection. In the theatrical version, this text appears optically, as we see the fates of Hicks, Newt, and Bishop, all of which are completely different shots than in the assembly cuts. Elliot Goldenthal's score is used much differently in each version, with the assembly cut using passages that set a more tragic tone as we learn of these characters' fates. In the theatrical, it feels much more ominous, much eerier. I have to admit, I prefer the way this sequence is presented in the theatrical version. I think it communicates the events more clearly and more to the point, and I think the tone is more appropriate for this portion of the film. The assembly cut also omits a shot I always thought was a pretty cool visual effects shot, the EEV being carried in by the crane, now in essence replaced with the long shot of the vehicle being pulled onto the beach by the oxen. And now we come to something very important in comparing these two versions. It's at this point in the theatrical cut that the movie offers its suggestion that a surviving facehugger has found its host. Spike has made his way to the EEV and barks wildly. Then there's the reveal of the facehugger crawling inside. We understand immediately what's about to happen with this dog, and it's confirmed in a later scene when Murphy discovers the marks on his face. With the assembly cut, the same general idea of one of these huggers attaching itself to an animal is communicated, but I think to a lesser effect. It's also introduced much later. Babe, the ox, is carried into the abattoir after having mysteriously died. Murphy is also in this version, now discovering the dead facehugger nearby. The suggestion is still there, of course, but it's less obvious, and maybe there was concern amongst executives that audiences wouldn't quite get it, calling for the need to make the changes that they did. I think that's reasonable enough, but I do like the inclusion of the different type of facehugger which we only see in a wide shot. The super, or royal, or aquatic facehugger, however you'd like to put it. But I do wonder how the assembly cut footage would have played out if it was included in the original theatrical release. Does it work better having the knowledge that an alien has found its host almost immediately into the movie, or is it more effective and more mysterious discovering this just a little bit later on? Would a viewer find themselves guessing how the alien was going to appear this time around? Was it in Newt? Did it find its way to one of the prisoners? It leaves some time for speculation. It's hard for me to gauge since I've seen the theatrical version so many times before seeing the assembly cut. If you're watching this, and your first experience in watching Alien 3 was the assembly cut, and had no idea about the host going into it, I'd love to know what your thoughts were in seeing it for the first time, so please leave a comment. I'm very curious specifically how this factor played out to first-time viewers of Alien 3 with this version. When we first get a look at all the main players in the prison, the assembly cut version has an extended version of the rumor control scene with a different opening. Here, Dylan leads the prisoners in a prayer before Superintendent Andrews makes his announcements. The opening is different, but the rest of the scene plays out as it does in the theatrical version. From a pacing perspective, you can probably understand why the beginning of this scene was trimmed. But this does better establish the nature of this ecosystem. It focuses on the deeply religious customs of these men, and how while it is a prison, they've transformed it to be more of a monastery. This is much more a reflection of the original Vincent Ward story treatment. While Andrews is officially in charge, Dylan is the leader, and his prayers take precedent to rumor control. We'll see this again later in the film. The idea of Dylan being the unofficial leader is definitely conveyed in the theatrical version as well, but it is presented undeniably stronger in the assembly cut. The next differences we see occur in the Newt autopsy scene. No, it's not the extremely graphic original scene that reportedly made people viewing it sick. That's not likely ever to see the light of day, but we do have some additional dialogue in the scene's opening. Ripley and Clemens descend the stairs into the morgue, and Clemens presses as to why she is so insistent on seeing how this little girl died. Then, the knife through the heart. He asks if the girl was her daughter. Ripley replies, no, she wasn't. She's composed here, but we know just how harsh of a question this must be to her. But what is she really to say? No, but in a way she was. She was very important to me. Maybe if things went differently, we would have returned to Earth and I would have adopted her. Or maybe she could have told Clemens and herself a sweet little lie and said yes. What difference could that make anyway? But Ripley doesn't seem the type to do that. It's a simple enough question from Clemens, but to Ripley and to us, the audience, who went through this whole experience in the previous film with these two characters, it's incredibly complex. Having to answer it feels almost like a defeat. A small bit of dialogue, but with many implications, and maybe it was cut simply because Ripley has already gone through enough, and it almost feels like it's kicking her when she's down. The rest of the scene plays out as it does in the theatrical cut, and in that cut, the next scene to follow would be the funeral. In the assembly cut, we get an additional scene between two prisoners where, as previously mentioned, the facehugger makes its appearance. Prisoners Frank and Murphy bring the recently deceased ox, Babe, into the abattoir and share a crass discussion about the woman who has suddenly made her way into their community. Just as Superintendent Andrews expressed concerns over in the previous scene, these prisoners are already starting to get some ideas. One thing that has probably begun to be apparent in this version is that the theatrical cut seems to be less interested in scenes only featuring the prisoners of Fury 161. Much of the cuts, at least in the first half of the film, are scenes and moments that don't focus on or include Ripley. With this in mind, it's hard to actually work around this particular scene since the payoff comes at the very end when Murphy discovers the facehugger, and the suggestion that the ox has been implanted has now been implanted. If you're looking at this from an executive point of view with close to 30 minutes into the movie now, you may understand the need to change from the ox to the dog. 2 shots, one of Spike, one of the facehugger, amounting to a little more than 10 seconds, versus a nearly 2-minute scene of a conversation that, to be fair, doesn't really move the plot forward in any way. Sure, it could be trimmed, and maybe even what we see in the assembly cut already was, but it can't really be cut entirely because of the reveal at the end. For what it's worth, I like the scene. I like seeing more of the prisoners and their interactions in this version, but I can at least understand and appreciate the decisions to make certain cuts and changes back in 1992. It just goes to show the different priorities these different versions of the film really have. The funeral for Hicks and Newt plays out differently between each version, but the general tone of this scene is the same with both. We have the readings from Andrews and the speech from Dylan, and the bodies being dropped into the furnace, all intercut with the chestburster making its appearance. I think it's effective in both versions, a very somber and unsettling juxtaposition of death and birth. It's fascinating comparing these 2 cuts and how they play out. The footage of the funeral is exactly the same in each cut, except for one shot, but in the theatrical we get cuts to the dog, and in the assembly we get cuts to the ox. The ox is already dead, so there's no struggle on a living animal's part, so it's more like this silent time bomb just ready to go off at any moment. With the dog, we see the struggle, and we hear the whimpers and yelps of agony as this poor animal suffers. Both ways are chilling in their own execution. Some of the alien effect shots are identical, but you'll notice the alternate cuts show the dead ox in the background of the assembly cut version. Both are great, with fantastic work from Studio ADI, but in this spiffy new version for 2003, we get effects achieved with CGI. These effects were conceived during the production using a puppet, but were never finalized until the release of the special edition, though we do see a little bit of it in the theatrical cut. And I guess we should talk about the dog suit. Yes, the infamous dog suit, an idea in theory that should have worked quite nicely, but in execution just didn't deliver. They constructed this whole suit to custom fit a trained canine actor to get the shot of the alien scurrying away, but it just didn't end up looking right. In fact, it ended up looking pretty comical, so it was scrapped. It wasn't even attempted in the reshoots. Instead, we just see the camera panning away from Spike's corpse to achieve the same general idea. I think that ended up working just fine, but how great is it to see this effect achieved nearly 20 years later with modern effects? It's true what they say. Films aren't finished, they're only abandoned. That may relate especially to Alien 3, but here we see the possibilities explored and giving it another chance. After Ripley's new haircut is revealed, and she takes a shower, we see further interactions between the prisoners and more of Dylan's leadership amongst them. This is also where we get the first notes into Golic's subplot, which is crucial in this version, but was just about cut entirely in 1992. Dylan has caught wind of some disharmony in the group and speaks to Boggs and Rains regarding their complaints over Golic. They say he's crazy, he smells bad, they don't want to work with him. Dylan defends Golic and strongly insists that the men take their reservations aside and keep the peace. After this moment, Ripley enters the mess hall and is met with all eyes staring at her, just as in the theatrical version. There's an additional insert in the assembly cut version with Andrews and Aaron at their own table. Andrews knows this woman is giving the prisoners bad ideas. Aaron agrees. Ripley sits with Dylan, and their conversation plays out the same as it does in the theatrical version, except that the theatrical version cuts off the tail end. The scene closes with Dylan's line,
"You see, we've got a good place to wait here. And until now, no temptation."
The assembly cut extends this scene with Ripley inquiring about what exactly they're waiting for, and Dylan explains their religious beliefs. They're waiting for God to return, to raise his servants to redemption. There's a lot going on in this scene that the theatrical cut ends up whittling down. A few establishing shots, which I guess aren't too missed for the sake of time. The conversation about Golic, which, since so much of him was cut, only makes sense to remove. The moment with Andrews and Aaron, which was an amusing back and forth that further establishes their relationship, and the Aaron character, who has an interesting arc. He goes from being this peripheral yes-man to Andrews, never questioning the company, to taking some very bold action against Bishop 2 at the very end of the movie. I like their moments, and I wish it stayed in. And of course, I really like the Golic subplot, so his stuff with Boggs and Rain should have stayed in too. I will say, though, that I think the theatrical version ends this scene as a whole on a stronger note, with Dylan's "no temptation" line to Ripley. It makes it feel just a little more ominous. At this point, we might not really be sure if we can fully trust Dylan, or if he poses a threat to her. It wouldn't be until later, when he saves her from the prisoners ganging up on her, that we'd know for sure he's a good ally to Ripley. Leaving the scene on this note, instead of speaking of his religion, allows us to meditate on that possibility just a little more. The very next scene also has a different ending note between each version. Clemens fills Ripley in on the religious nature of this community a little more, and Ripley asks Clemens if he's attracted to her. He says she's very direct, and she replies, "I've been out here a long time." And that's where the scene ends in the theatrical version. In the assembly cut, Clemens quips back, "So have I." An interesting addition. Clemens can carry his own against Ripley. He's not just some lovesick schoolboy followed around by the nose. There is a genuine rapport between the two. And I like Clemens. I think he's a good character, and clearly he's even stronger in this assembly cut version. But Ripley is the main character. Sigourney Weaver was an executive producer. You could probably understand why they wanted to give Ripley the stronger punctuation for this scene. Murphy's death scene is identical in both versions, but it does present an inconsistency in the assembly cut, which has always bugged me. Murphy is cleaning inside the vent shaft. He discovers the shed skin of the alien and notices movement inside a small area. This is, of course, the alien, but Murphy mistakes it for Spike, the dog. He calls out to Spike, asks him what he's doing in there. The only problem is, there is no Spike in the assembly cut. There's not a single moment, shot, or even reference to the dog that exists anywhere prior in this version. Spike exists purely in the theatrical cut. If anyone does happen to be watching the assembly cut for the first time, then this must have been pretty perplexing. Who the hell is Spike? It's more of a mystery than who the hell is Vincent, but we'll get to that. I just wish they simply removed the dialogue, since in earlier work print cuts it didn't exist anyway, and certainly wasn't needed here. I figured it must have just been some kind of oversight, and when I heard in 2011 that the Blu-ray version of the Alien 3 Special Edition was going to come with audio improvements, I was actually secretly hoping they'd remove the references to Spike. No such luck. It remains in this version. A small detail, sure, but it's definitely something that takes away from this version. For me, at least. The next few scenes, including Ripley and Clemens' post-coital conversation, the discussion between Andrews, Aarons, and Clemens at the site of the accident, and Ripley searching for the flight recorder, play out the same. At this section of the movie, though, we begin to see some significant restructuring of events. We see a newly added scene where Boggs, Rains, and Golic prepare for their foraging mission in the tunnels. Boggs and Rains complain amongst themselves about Golic, keeping an earshot away from Dylan, who is also present. We also learn that word has got out about Murphy's death. There is a restored beginning and ending to Clemens' meeting with Andrews. There's not too much in the beginning portion, but I think there's a nice little detail that kind of perfectly communicates their relationship. Clemens takes a glass of tea. Andrews asks him if he'd like some sugar with it. He declines. He asks if he'd like milk, and Clemens replies, "A little bit, please." Instead of fixing the tea for him, he simply passes the creamer jar before him so he can do it himself. As I understand, in English culture, this is an enormous and blatant sign of contempt. Aaron is present initially, and once he leaves, Andrews goes off on Clemens, as we see in the beginning of the scene in the theatrical cut.
Listen to me, you piece of shit. You screw with me one more time, I'll cut you in half.
There's some additional dialogue from Andrews about his general dislike of Clemens, and he asks if there's anything he should know about Ripley. This is where the scene ends in the theatrical version, but it plays out longer in the assembly cut. Clemens reveals that she told him she was part of a combat unit that came to grief, but beyond that, assumes it's all classified. He's grilled a little bit more, but divulges no further information, and is dismissed. While I like the restored version of this scene, I think comparing to how it's presented in the theatrical cut reveals just how powerful the editing in a film can be just by deciding how one scene ends and another begins. In the theatrical version, we have the scene with Ripley and Clemens at the EEV discussing where to find Bishop. Clemens says, "I can't join you, I have a previous engagement." The very next moment, we're thrust into the meeting scene where Andrews is tearing into him. It lends the scene a comedic element that would otherwise not exist without such a transition. Not that it's laugh-out-loud hilarious or anything, but it's definitely something funny we can key into and a comedic jump we can understand. A character says they have a meeting with their boss. Cut to their boss calling them a piece of shit. I think that works pretty nicely. We don't get that in the assembly cut. The scene with Ripley and Clemens ends, then the scene that follows is the group preparing for their foraging mission. Following that is the meeting scene between Clemens and Andrews with the restored opening. There's still a hint of humor in that Andrews waits for Aaron to leave before dropping all pleasantries, but it doesn't land quite as directly or stand out as much as it does with the theatrical cut. The way the scene ends in the theatrical version also offers different ideas purely because of the editing. Andrews asks, "Is there anything I should know?" and the scene leaves things hanging there, ending without us knowing how the conversation may have turned. We're cued to wonder, what does Clemens know? What did he reveal after Andrews' intimidation? Did he betray Ripley in some way, albeit under duress? We're left to wonder these things, but the assembly cut doesn't encourage that kind of meditation. Clemens reveals what he knows, which isn't much, and the scene concludes. It lacks a certain kind of suspense offered from the theatrical cut. I think both versions of the scene are good, but it truly is amazing just how much can change when the first and last 30 seconds or so of a scene gets cut out. There's more footage of Golic's erratic behavior in the special edition, featuring a moment where he breaks open a cigarette machine and skips away catching up to the others. The rest of the scene in the tunnels plays out the same, with the deaths of Boggs and Rains and Golic running away screaming. The 2003 version has much more to offer in its aftermath. The scene where Ripley retrieves Bishop to the infirmary and brings him back online is now differently edited. It is now intercut with restored footage of Golic presented in two different segments. The first is prisoner Kevin discovering him alone in the mess hall, eating cereal, still caked in blood from his encounter with the alien. The next, we see that Kevin has called on Dylan, Andrews, and Aaron for help, and they slowly approach Golic with a straitjacket and gang up on him. This would lead to the later moment we see in both versions, where Golic is being carried into the infirmary ranting and raving about the dragon. Of all the changes to the special edition, this might actually be the one I feel most conflicted about. I really like the restored footage. It is an undeniably creepy and unnerving image to see Golic in the mess hall covered in blood, with the deranged smile he gives Kevin. I just wish it wasn't linked with the scene between Ripley and Bishop, which is one of my favorite scenes of the movie. In being able to see it presented in two different ways between these two versions of the movie, I can confidently say it's a stronger scene when presented solidly from beginning to end. It's more urgent, more intimate, and I think diverting our attention away from the conversation between these two characters to cut to the other action with Golic unfortunately takes away from the scene's momentum. These moments with Golic seem to be designed to be cutaways, so they can't be placed anywhere else chronologically in the film, and they simply can't exist without cutting into the Ripley and Bishop scene. It's a tough one for me, but I'll put on the cold, calculating executive hat and conclude that these Golic scenes aren't crucial. We can fill in our own assumptions about how he was found between scenes and brought into the infirmary. The theatrical cut works just fine in that sense, and reluctantly, I'll say it works better. After Ripley has her confrontation in vain with Andrews and is confined to the infirmary, there's additional footage inserted throughout. There's an opening shot with Golic on the bed, confined with a straitjacket, and more dialogue as he interrupts Ripley and Clemens' conversation. Pretty good line makes it into the assembly cut. In an insane world, a sane man must appear insane. Clemens brushes it off, saying, "That's very profound, Golic, thank you." When the alien makes its appearance, there are quite a few more shots that make its way into the special edition version that were omitted from the theatrical cut. A lot of these are from Golic's point of view as he keys into the alien's presence before the others. Most are intense, quick shots that add to the chaos of the scene. I think they work very nicely. One particularly noticeable shot is a close-up of the alien's jaws, right before Clemens is struck in the skull with its inner jaw. It's very reminiscent of the close-ups we saw in the original Ridley Scott film, but I guess this was deemed unnecessary for the theatrical cut. As Ripley takes off to warn the others, the assembly cut features a new closing to the scene. Golic looks up into the duct, where the alien has escaped with blood dripping outwards. He comments to himself, "Magnificent," and thus begins the obsession and psychological hold the alien has over him, which of course will have a good payoff in this version. Before Andrews goes off on another rumor control speech, once again we see that this practice is preceded by Dylan leading the group in a prayer. As the prayer closes, Dylan expresses his frustration at the events unfolding. He angrily commands the prisoners to stick together, and is cut off by Andrews as the scene continues the same way as it does in the theatrical cut. Once Andrews is killed, the movie as a whole takes a significant turn. There's little holding on to the old way of life. The world has completely changed for Fury's inhabitants, and it is now a matter of survival. The prisoner Jude attempts to maintain some of his routine, as we saw him earlier preparing to mop up after Murphy's death. He does the same after Andrews is killed. The assembly cut features a new shot from the point of view of the air duct, while Jude nervously cleans the blood from the floor. The scene that follows also adds more footage as the prisoners convene in the assembly hall. Once again, Dylan leads a prayer to the group before the official business begins. There's also a restored line from Ripley after Morse confronts her and suggests shoving her head through the wall.
Sounds good to me.
A pretty good line. A pretty sharp and morbid retort from Ripley. Perhaps too morbid for the theatrical cut. As they begin to prepare for their plan to flush the alien out with fire and trap it in the toxic waste tank, there are a few moments offered that were cut from the theatrical version. One that arguably clears up a supposed contradiction. Earlier, Aaron laments that they have thousands of flashlights but no batteries to use them, yet a few moments later we see that he actually does have a working flashlight in order to give his signal. And we see a fair amount of other working flashlights used throughout. It is revealed that 2 prisoners have been put on flashlight duty, sorting through the entire supply of batteries in search for the rare ones that actually work. To be fair, there is a shot in the theatrical cut during the montage of prep work that shows a close-up of a prisoner rummaging through some supplies and finding batteries, but it's generally much better communicated in the special edition. Altogether, there's more of the details of the preparation than what was seen in the theatrical version. There are more shots of spreading the quinitracetylene throughout the area and some further interactions between prisoners. I think the additions make this montage feel just a little grander, showing that it was a more complex and time-consuming job that required all of the effort of everyone working together. This is definitely a case of little details in this alternate cut all adding up and strengthening its moments. Both versions work just fine, but I appreciate the slight bit more offered from the assembly cut. There's also an extended moment between Ripley and Dylan, which originally ends with Dylan's comments about Dr. Clemens. Here it continues, where Ripley pauses to catch her breath, appearing strained.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Whatever you say, but you don't look okay to me, sister.
I'm fine.
This would be a little hint of Ripley being infected with the alien queen embryo, as revealed later in the film. Maybe this was a little too much too soon before the reveal. Earlier there already was a pretty strong suggestion, with Ripley encountering the alien in the infirmary and being spared. I think that was a good enough clue of what's to come without anything further needed to guide the audience's way of thinking. This is especially true of the theatrical cut, since the big reveal would end up coming much sooner with all the footage that would be eventually removed. It's at this point in the assembly cut where things take an enormous turn. Things go awry with the plan, and the explosive chaos ensues. With the restored footage, this chaos is heightened even further than it is in the theatrical version. There's more of the prisoners reacting to what's unfolding, more of the confusion and desperation all around, and it feels altogether grander in scale. The theatrical cut, by comparison, feels more of a greatest hits of this scene, choosing the best pyrotechnic effects shots, which are admittedly great, and focusing more on the key characters of the narrative rather than showing how it affects everyone. The breadth and danger and tragedy that occurs is lost a little bit in the theatrical cut. And this isn't even considering the significant differences that are to follow. In the theatrical cut, Dylan activates the sprinklers and the scene concludes. Here things go on much further. Certain shots are extended and certain shots are repositioned between cuts. There's a moment with Ripley helping out a prisoner who is caught on fire. She pauses and there's a look of recognition. She realizes she's helping out Gregor and Junior, 2 of the prisoners that tried to rape her earlier in the film. There's much said simply by the looks they exchange, but true to Ripley's character, she knows there are larger issues at play, and she needs to do what she can to preserve life, even of the intolerable. We then follow Junior on his way through the chaos, and here we see the alien appear, scaling down the wall and right in front of the prisoner. There's a brief standoff, and Junior makes a run for it, luring it into the toxic waste tank. Ripley and Dylan rush to close the doors. A sacrifice has been made. The beast has been trapped. Despite everything that went horribly wrong, the plan actually worked. The plot of this alternate version has entered a brand new territory. This has to be the most infamous of all omissions from the movie, Even those who may not have read the novelization or comic book adaptation must have suspecting something was missing here. There was evidence of it in the trailers, in trading cards, and promotional images. There was much more than what audiences were shown in 1992. So here, in the 2003 version, we have it restored. The rod puppet effects are restored and look pretty good, or at least as good as the other rod puppet effects presented in the film look. I really like this whole moment and the aspect of Junior's sacrifice, though admittedly it does feel just a tad bit incomplete. I suspect that if the decision was made to move forward with this whole subplot, some additional footage and effects may have been utilized to communicate what's going on in the scene. Maybe an additional shot of the alien as Ripley waves the torch at it. Maybe an additional rod puppet effect where we actually see Junior running into the tank and the alien following him. Still, it works just fine. And undeniably, it's a terrifying concept of being alone, completely sealed in this area with the alien. And the sounds of the alien, and Junior's screaming, and the tail whipping is all very unnerving. Because the alien is successfully captured in this version, the aftermath is all the more bittersweet. The montage of searching for the dead is present in both versions, with additional footage in the assembly cut, which transitions into a scene of Dylan leading the prisoners in prayer. Dylan sees it as a time to rejoice, and salutes the courage of those who have died. Those who are dead are not dead, he preaches. They have moved up. They have moved to a higher place. Ripley and Aaron are separated from the group and discuss the nature of their religion. Aaron's not all too impressed with it, calling them, as Andrews once did, Dylan's God Squad. His opinion is that religion was only useful in keeping the prisoners out of trouble. Here Ripley begins to express her doubt that the company won't destroy the alien when the rescue team arrives. Aaron believes, rather blindly, that of course they'll kill it. Ripley isn't so sure. This version has some good additional moments between these characters. It progresses in a really interesting way that unfortunately we don't get to see unfold in the theatrical cut. Ripley remains somewhat cordial with Aaron, knowing he alone has the ability to transmit to the company. There's an amusing moment where she dictates a message for him to send, but he struggles with the word xenomorph, and she takes over. She lets them know they have captured the xenomorph and bluffs by requesting permission to terminate it, knowing full well they have no way to do so. When permission is denied, this confirms her suspicions that Weyland-Yutani has other plans for the beast. She brings these concerns to Dylan, trying to convince him to help her kill it somehow. To her surprise, Dylan is apathetic. This is another great scene between two characters, and a further window into the religious beliefs of this community. The outside world doesn't exist to them. It doesn't matter if the company takes the alien, can't control it, and innocent people die in the process.
We've got our own little world out here. It ain't much, but it's ours.
So fuck everybody else.
No. Fuck them.
There's more of Gallic in this section of the film, of course. We return to the character after a long absence, though not as long as in the theatrical cut, where he's last seen in Clemens' death scene and then mysteriously disappears altogether. We see that Morse has been keeping watch over him, still confined into a straitjacket, and he pleads to his fellow prisoner to let him loose. Then, in possibly the dumbest decision of this entire series, yes, dumber than sticking your head into a mysterious alien egg, dumber than trying to pet a hissing space snake, Morse lets Gallic out of his straitjacket. Not only that, but he proceeds to immediately turn his back on him. Well, Gallic knocks him out cold and makes his way to where the alien is locked away. He kills the guard, switches the release on the doors on the toxic waste tank, and carefully makes his way inside. He tries speaking to the alien, saying, "Tell me what to do next," and then the alien kills him. His actual death occurs off-screen, but we do see a shot of the alien running out of the tank. This is one of the lesser rod puppet effects presented in the film, if not the worst. Something about it just doesn't quite look right. I appreciate the restoration, but I think the more appropriate ending to the scene would have been Gallic's scream and the cut to black. But the bottom line here is that the beast is now free and is once again stalking the halls of Fury 161. Morse has come to and informs Ripley and Dylan of the news. He describes it as a teeny-weeny problem. Quite the understatement. This concludes a stretch of the movie that lasts about 10 minutes where just about none of it can be seen in any shape or form in the theatrical version. Very literally, the theatrical cut takes a lot away from the movie by removing the capture of the alien and its subsequent release. I suppose it functions cohesively enough without it. Some could argue that if it was caught and released anyway, there wasn't much point in including this portion of the movie anyway. In the Wreckage and Rage documentary, producer John Landau argues that in capturing the beast, it somehow demystifies it. I guess I can sort of see where he's coming from with that, but I really like this whole subplot. I wish it stayed in. With that in mind, I have to admit, the way they were able to get around these cuts and continue the film from the aftermath of the explosion scene was brilliantly edited. All it took was some additional dialogue from Morse, calling to Dylan that he's found another body. Now the context changes from finding Gollick's dead body after freeing the alien to a continued survey for survivors of the fire. It's pretty seamless. Learning that the beast has been freed naturally brings morale down, and the assembly cut features a newly added scene with the prisoners gathered in the assembly hall. This is an interesting scene, and the first we see of the group questioning Dylan's leadership. They believe they're all sitting ducks, just waiting for the beast to come and get them. They eventually pull together and decide to wait for the rescue team at the furnace, reasoning that the alien wouldn't likely go there due to its fear of fire. This is where we already find the group in the theatrical version, without the need for such a revelation. I like the scene, and I think technically it still could have worked in the theatrical version, actually, because the tone of despair and desperation could also just as easily be attributed to all the loss of life in the explosion, rather than the news that the alien is once again loose. I also think it's a good breather scene, taking place in this cut right after the scene where Ripley discovers she has an alien embryo inside of her. I think it's good to hang on that reveal for a bit and show something else with other characters. In the theatrical cut, the next scene is another scene with Ripley and Aaron, this time in the comm room, separated only by a shot of the company's satellite. Given that it's such a huge moment and such a devastating discovery for Ripley, I think it's a better choice to have us digest this information for a little bit before we see what Ripley's next move is. Even though the theatrical cut made it abundantly clear it's more interested in Ripley than the supporting prisoner characters, it would have been nice to at least see what they've been up to and how they're feeling about the whole situation. This scene was the perfect opportunity for that, and also to leave us in a little bit of suspense after Ripley's worst nightmare comes true. It doesn't take too much time away from the focus on Ripley, it's just a little over 2 minutes, and it works well in the assembly cut. It should have been put to use in the theatrical version as well, if nothing else. There's some interesting additional dialogue with Ripley and Aaron in their scene in the comm room. Ripley expresses to Aaron and to the audience that she recognized the embryo inside her as not just any run-of-the-mill alien, but that of a queen. This also strongly suggests to her that the alien won't kill her if she faces it, since she's carrying its future. Although keen-eyed viewers could possibly recognize that the embryo is different and possibly a queen, it isn't outright confirmed until this scene. In the theatrical cut, it wouldn't be mentioned until Ripley's scene later on with Dylan when she asks him to kill her. Maybe during editing, it was deemed redundant that in 2 separate scenes so close together, Ripley shouldn't have to twice mention she's carrying a xenomorph queen, so they only included one reference. Arguably, it's in the more dramatic moment of the two. But I'd say this is a queen xenomorph. This is extremely bad news, and the implications are severe, so maybe it does bear repeating. I'm very sad to say that the scene where Ripley searches for the alien in the basement does not contain any additional footage in the special edition version. We can say with a fair amount of certainty that such footage exists, also from some promotional images and behind-the-scenes footage. Whether enough of that footage exists to coherently edit into the scene, or it just simply didn't work with the flow of its closure, it's unfortunately nowhere to be found. The scene plays out the same in both versions of the movie. There's some additional dialogue between Ripley and Dylan in their scene. Once again, Ripley states that the alien won't kill her because she's carrying its future. In the theatrical version, Dylan asks how the alien got inside of her, and she answers that it likely happened while she was in hypersleep, without any further elaboration. Here we get an additional, rather morbid line from Ripley. "I was violated, and now I get to be the mother of the year." Although maybe a little bit of debate exists surrounding this line. Many people hear the line as, "Now I get to be the mother of the year," while others simply hear it as, "Now I get to be the mother." I figured this may be an inconsistency between the originally released 2003 version with the onset audio and the 2011 version with the newly recorded dialogue. maybe it actually could be that both these separate lines exist. But in comparing the two, it sounds just about the same, so maybe this particular piece of dialogue wasn't re-recorded. It doesn't help that Ripley is very quiet in her delivery, practically whispering. If we look to the subtitles in the new audio versions, both on Blu-ray and in digital formats, the line does actually appear as, "Now I get to be the mother." Perhaps the original 2003 quadrilogy DVD differs, but it does not. The line still reads as, "Now I get to be the mother." Very curious. As a last-ditch effort, I took a look at the source, the script. Yes, the famously reliable Alien 3 script. Across different drafts, the line doesn't exist. The closest is a 1990 draft from David Giler and Walter Hill that differs even further. Ripley says, "Now I get to be the mother of the apocalypse." Clearly, during the filming, this line was changed. But to what? I'll let you decide.
Now I get to be the mother.
At the closing of this scene, Dylan has an additional line which is pretty harsh before Ripley agrees to help him and the others kill the beast. "Go kill yourself." The assembly cut has some additional lines in the scene where Ripley and Dylan call on the prisoners to take a final stand against the alien. The scene opens with slightly different dialogue and slightly different line delivery.
You die sitting here on your ass, or you die out there. At least we take a shot. We owe it one. This is the choice. You die sitting here on your ass, or you die out there. At least we take a shot. We owe it one.
What the fuck are you talking about?
I'm talking about killing that big motherfucker. Maybe we can get even for the others. Now, how do you want it?
What the fuck are you talking about?
I'm talking about killing that big motherfucker.
There is also some additional dialogue of Ripley's insistence that the company is not going to kill the alien, much to Aaron's denial. Even Dylan's big speech to inspire the others is extended slightly. There's an extra line. "You're all gonna die, the only question is when." This is as good a place as any to take your first steps to heaven. I've always loved this speech. I think it's great in the 1992 version, and certainly in the 2003 version. But maybe I'm just so used to the original dialogue that this extra little bit takes me off guard each time. It sort of alters the rhythm that I'm used to, especially with the way Elliot Goldenthal's rousing score complements it at just the right times. So it's a personal bias, I guess, but I think it works better in the theatrical cut. Most of the bait and chase sequence remains the same between versions, but there are some notable exceptions. After Dylan relays the plan to trap the alien in the lead mold, there is an alternate series of moments. Originally, Ripley asks where the others are, and Dylan responds that they're praying. In the theatrical version, it then cuts to David complaining to Jude about the plan. It's a humorous moment, definitely more of Alien 3's particular brand of dark humor, and once again shows just how exactly that can be conveyed through editing alone. In the assembly cut version, it cuts to William, who is, in fact, praying. A brief conversation follows with Gregor about whether or not they truly have faith in this religion, and there's some added shots of the prisoners tensely preparing for what's to come. The assembly cut removes a moment I actually really liked, where we cut back to Aaron, who's now on his own. He streaks away the stream from the mirror and takes a good look at himself, somewhat echoing the earlier scene with Ripley when her bald head is revealed. It's a small moment, but I missed it quite a bit. There's a curious added moment where David wanders the dark halls with a torch in hand and comes upon a wall splattered with blood. He calls out, "I think I found Vincent." Who exactly is Vincent? Even if you consider yourself a big fan of Alien 3 and have seen either version several times over, you shouldn't feel too bad if the identity of this Vincent character remains a complete mystery. There are no references to a Vincent character in any prior scenes. No one in the cast is credited as Vincent. There is a Vincent mentioned in the novelization of Alien 3, but also only in this specific section of the story with no previous mentions. He's described as a friend of Kevin's, and he's supposed to be the poor bastard the alien is seen chomping on as the chase scene begins. Even the WEYLAND-YUTANI report, the official in-universe reference for the films, has a bit of fun with the character. He is mentioned in the roster of prisoners with no accompanying photo like the others, but a notation from the company saying that the records have been lost. So he could be one of the various shown throughout the film that has no lines or can only be seen in the background. Somehow, he survived the explosion and was just simply never seen on screen afterwards, but ended up being the first to be killed during the finale. Your guess is as good as mine. The other restored moment during this sequence takes place shortly after, where Morse and Gregor scramble into the piston chamber, much to everyone's confusion, including their own. Ripley expresses some frustration since this was not part of the plan. She asks what the hell they're doing. Dylan answers that they're improvising. In one of my favorite moments of the assembly cut, Ripley finally can't help but smile to herself, seemingly almost holding back a little bit of laughter. The rest of this portion of the film plays out the same between each cut, up to the moments where Bishop 2 is introduced. When I first saw this new version, back in 2003, there was something very specific I had been anticipating the whole time. Very memorably, across trailers and TV spots for the film, Ripley delivers the line,
For the last time.
To my disappointment, this line is not restored. Clearly, this line was meant to be included right before she activates the sprinklers which kill the alien. Her own personal hasta la vista baby. In the finished film, it even looks like she's about to say something, but does not, in either version. Why it never made its way into any cut, I can't say for sure. Maybe it was deemed a weak one-liner and only suitable as trailer bait to remind audiences this is supposed to be the grand finale to the trilogy, but I like the line. I really do wish it had been included in the movie. I was especially surprised, and frankly still am, that with all the restorations included in the assembly cut, big and small, this one didn't make the cut. It was a mistake. There was a need for it. I'm happy to say, though, that we get some very compelling additional footage with Bishop 2 in Ripley's final scene. I'm of the belief that even with the ticking clock of the alien inside her, this scene is best played out as long as reasonably possible. There's more conflict with Ripley and further temptation as Bishop 2 tries to convince her to trust the company. The scientist explains a procedure that could remove the embryo. It all sounds very safe and effective. It sounds quick, easy, and maybe even painless. After Ripley refuses, and Aaron attacks Bishop 2, there's some additional Lance Henriksen footage, which is always a plus. Bishop 2 winces in pain and notices the blood pouring from his wound. He calls out to Ripley, telling her he's not an android. He pleads with Ripley some more and turns to see one of the company men recording everything. He shouts, "No pictures," to him before returning his attention back to Ripley. Some further time is taken in this version before Ripley finally makes her sacrifice. She takes some deep breaths. She utters the line, "You're crazy," and these would be her last words. She makes her fall into the furnace, and the assembly cut features a restored shot, replacing what we saw in the theatrical version. There's no chestburster in this version. Ripley gracefully falls into the furnace, and the flames consume her. This is not a new effect using CGI. This was actually achieved, or at least very close to being achieved and completed, at the time. For a special effect in 1992, it deserves at least some credit for being pulled off in a pre-CG world. Still, it's not great. In fact, it's pretty distracting, and I think takes away from the emotional impact of this bittersweet moment. It might even be the worst and least convincing effect of the entire movie. I think the lesser of two evils is undoubtedly the shots we see in the theatrical cut, which were the results of reshoots at Fox Studios in Los Angeles in 1992. As opposed to the studio in England where the bulk of the production took place. They had precious few weeks and a $16,000 bald cap to get the footage they needed for this troubled production, and the results are effective given the circumstances. There's some strobing in the effects which couldn't be altered or fixed, but Ripley feels much more real here compared to the other effect where a viewer could feel almost disconnected in seeing an elaborate effect instead of a person. And of course, the biggest difference here is that the alien Queen Chestburster emerges, and moments before her death, Ripley suffers the fate that she's been dreading all along. Just by the concept alone, I'm of two minds as to which feels the more appropriate ending for Ripley. On one hand, it does feel more like a victory that she was able to prevent the alien from birthing, and she had a quick, dignified death on her own terms. On the other hand, when you reveal a character to be impregnated with an alien, you naturally, albeit morbidly, expect a payoff to that, which is to see it burst out of the victim's chest. Even if it is Ripley, who deserves better. With the theatrical cut, it feels like a fair enough middle ground, though. She's still alive when the Queen bursts out of her chest. she's able to grab a hold of it and secure it, making sure in her very final moments that it's not getting anywhere. It's a bizarre but oddly moving mother and child embrace, symbolically illustrating how close she's become to the alien. I think it just plain works better, and some sketchy special effects aside, they do service much better than what's seen in the assembly cuts. Altogether, though, these versions of Alien 3 are worlds apart. They truly feel like two separate movies telling the same general story, but each in a vastly different way. The question we're left with, though, is which of these is the better movie? Ultimately, it does come down to your own preference. For some fans of the film, the 1992 version was good back then, and it's still good today, with nothing extra needed. For others, the 2003 version was almost like a religious awakening, finally seeing what could have been done with the story and its characters. A glimpse of a great film, flaws and all. But maybe after going through all of this, that's too easy of an answer to give, and I should at least give my own personal preference and stand by it. Fair enough. On the whole, as a finished product, however loosely you want to take that term, I do actually prefer the theatrical cut. I'm sure admirers of the assembly cut will take that as blasphemy, but to be clear, I also love the 2003 version. The theatrical version just plays out a little better for me. It has a rhythm and flow to it that, despite what's missing, feels decisive, feels purposeful, has some kind of method to it. No doubt I'd attribute this to the talents of editor Terry Rawlings, who also edited the original 1979 film. While the assembly cut was based just about entirely on a rough cut prepared by Rawlings and overseen by David Fincher, neither had any input on what was released in 2003. I believe there is plenty within the rough cut that may have been excised anyway before handing in a final cut, had Fincher been awarded such a luxury. But that's part of what I like about the 2003 special edition. They include as much as possible for us, the viewer, to make our own determinations about how closely it may have followed Fincher's original vision and how it compares to what was released in 1992. I don't want to devalue the effort that went into producing the special edition in any way. I'm immensely grateful for it. I think I just appreciate it in more of a novel way than seeing it as a replacement for the theatrical cut. I think both can exist in harmony. I can watch one version or another depending on which I feel like watching. It's not at all like with Aliens, where 9 times out of 10 since, let's say, 1999 when the special edition came to DVD, I've chosen the special edition, and that's a pretty easy choice. Alien 3 is not so easy. There are things between each cut that I prefer. Very generally, an ideal cut for me would be in keeping the dog as the original host, retaining the Gallic subplots, and making sure we see the chestburster at the end. Anything else in between may vary. But if you twist my arm, or if someone comes up to me and says, "Hey, I've never seen Alien 3 before, which version should I watch?" then I'm going to have to go with the theatrical cut. It's imperfect, both versions still are, but there is an undeniable amount of talent both in front of the camera and behind it that continues to intrigue to this day. The assembly cut is an embarrassment of riches, and has complemented and enhanced a film that I already had a large amount of affection for. It was always a dream to finally see a cut like this made available, and in 2003, that dream came true. If I can dream even further, I'd love to see David Fincher revisit the footage he directed all those years ago. Put him in an editing room with every single filmed frame available, and see what he could do to best capture that lost vision. An unlikely scenario, maybe, but I can dream. For now, here comes the time where I really want your input. Which version of Alien 3 do you prefer? Do you think I'm crazy for giving the edge to the theatrical, or do you see where I'm coming from? Did you originally hate the film but changed your mind after the assembly cuts? Do you hate the movie regardless of the cuts? Whatever the case may be, I'm really curious to hear your opinion, so please leave a comment below. As always, I'd like to thank you very much for watching today. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave it a like, and be sure to subscribe to the channel to keep up with future videos. A very special thanks goes out to Brandon James, Grizz4756, Ronni Jensen, and XenoShadowMorph, Queen Tiers of the Patreon Hive. Thank you to Gregory Ford and John Griggs, the Hive's Praetorians. A very, very special thanks to Lady Anne in the Ellen Ripley Tier of Excellence. And in the role of WEYLAND YUTANI executives, Michael Cole, Nicholas Butta, and Wesley A. Weaver, Jr. If you'd like to join the Hive and support the channel, check out my Patreon page in the links below. In the meantime, you can catch up with Alien Theory over social media. Follow @alien_theory on Twitter and @alientheoryyt on Facebook and Instagram for more. And until next time, this is Alien Theory, signing off.